Bond movies are going to have to approach the day when they're not shot on film anymore. That's going to happen. The manipulations that allows you now with dealing with the digital technology are endless and effortless. And I think some of the stuff we're doing in this, in terms of the big stunt effect sequences, are only going to be a precursor to what is going to follow in the next generation of Bond movies. The high-end action sequences that are done for real are still going to exist, but I think that it's going to be half of them will exist for real and half of them will be augmented with. And sometimes they may move into entirely digital special effects that way.
He's been very adventurous on this film. And I think I'm pretty sure that was a conscious decision, that he wanted to take Bond into this millennium in terms of technology. And we've certainly done that. You know, it is the first Bond where we've used major league CG. The script changed from its very first incarnation, but one sequence that remained right from the very beginning was the ice wave. And I could see immediately there was going to be a great deal of digital visual effects involvement.
By far the most unnerving stuff was Bond hanging off an ice wall in a world that didn't exist, which is a computer-generated world. That kind of really sent a lot of us into paroxysms of fear, if you will. My part in it is actually pretty minimal. Hanging Pierce on certain rigs and against blue screens was very easy. The tough part comes in the back end of this, once we have to start putting the rest of it in and making it real, because it will either stand or fall on whether this stuff works or not.
We very quickly set up a team, a CG team, doing R&D on water and ice, which this particular team had some experience of from other movies, Perfect Storm and various other films, but the way that we were going to use both the water and the ice was totally different and new and quite cutting edge, especially for a Bond film. You know, Bond films obviously have the reputation for doing as much as possible, absolutely for real. And this suddenly was an environment that we were going to create that was totally synthetic. I went with a very small aerial team up to Spitsbergen and shot all the material for the cliffs and the ice, which was an incredible shoot. I mean, just amazing. The amount of effort that's gone into that very tiny sequence is quite astonishing. One of the biggest challenges of the ice wave was that there was nowhere to hide in terms of the look. We were in broad daylight, full sunshine, and we had to create a totally CG environment which consisted entirely of ice, very difficult, water, quite difficult. That was a tremendous challenge. So here we have the final sequence of the ice wave. Fully rendered in CG environment, fully rendered in some cases CG Bond, blue screen Bond. Again, CG ice, CG water. And various live action elements. It started life as a very basic animatic, which Mark has got here, just to block out the storyboard frames. The beam cuts the ice cliff off, ice cliff falls, and creates the wave that Bond is going to surf on. And there's a lot more shots in this animatic than ended up in the final sequence. It's been cut down, rearranged as it's evolved. That top shot doesn't exist anymore. Very basic CG geometry, easy, quick, easy to change, easy to re-render. We knew we still had to do close-ups of Pierce, so we tested a camera rig and a rig for Pierce to be shot on a blue screen. We shot a lot of elements, some of which have been used for interaction, for Bond's interaction with the water, and also because floating in the water and being carried with the wave are huge icebergs, and those icebergs obviously have to interact with the water as well. So spray, foam, splashes, every kind of interaction we actually shot as elements out at Pinewood. Some of those have been used and some of them have been recreated as CG. I think what Cinesight have achieved in terms of the level of reality is extraordinary, both with the ice and with the water. But all those things have taken basically a year to develop. The finished result is that you believe that those icebergs are sitting suspended in that water. Each iceberg, depending on its size, has a certain weight, and you can feel the volume and you can see the base of the iceberg through the water and through the interaction, and it really is quite stupendous. I think one of the things that I'm particularly proud of that is almost a throwaway thing is the satellite. The design of it I love, and the concept of the satellite works really well. You only see it a few times and it's usually in the course of an action sequence, but if you actually look at the object itself and how it works, it's a combination of a miniature that was shot motion control and some very, very beautiful computer-generated elements as well. It's a very beautiful thing. I'm very happy with the satellite. The other sequence, which emerged soon after we started shooting, was the end sequence, the Antonov sequence, which, by virtue of the fact that it's all airborne, was going to be major league visual effects. And we had a 12th scale miniature of the entire plane. Because the Antonov is such a tremendously big aircraft, at 12th scale the wingspan of that model was still approximately 20 feet across. It was all shot with a motion control rig linked to a model mover on a green screen stage. So the Antonov goes into the Icarus beam and gets pretty well torched. So we cut to the exterior of the Antonov and it's gradually disintegrating. So it's been shot in separate passes with various levels of disintegration. So the model unit, as they were shooting it, gradually stripped back panels on the model to simulate the damage. There's a pass just for the lights on the plane. There's a pass for tracking, so that we've got the movement of the plane. The computer can take the move out of the, extract the camera move from the film using the tracking markers. We should have a beauty pass against black. And these are built up as layers to give the final result. There is a CG plane in there, but it's an invisible model. It's a very rough model that we've used as a collision model to wrap smoke and flame around, for the culmination of the whole destruction of the Antonov, because all the smoke and flame in that sequence is computer generated, so you have to have an object or a virtual object to wrap all that around. So there's an invisible CG component in there as well, but it's basically it's miniature.
Bond. James Bond.
I mean, every kid has a dream, wants to work on a Bond film on some level, so...
You think I'd leave this in the hands of the British?
I'm the first American to ever be an editor on a Bond movie, so bringing me over here and letting me have free reign, which they really did. It was a process of me learning about Lee and his way of doing things. He does a lot of cutting in the camera. He knows what he's doing. He's very focused. And what I try to do is take that footage and make it a little bit stylized.
Christian, my editor, has been cutting it very fast and very progressively modern, and I use that phrase advisedly because I'm always a little hesitant myself about that kind of music video approach to action.
I think one of the things that I like about editing the most is that I like to keep the camera moving as much as possible, because if it's moving all the time and there's a certain flow, for a very long time, I think before MTV came out, the theory behind editing was that the best edited film was a film where you never saw the edits. I think that theory is past gone. You know, I think films like The Matrix and John Woo films and Michael Bay just it's a flurry. It's a flurry of eye candy. I wanted to bring that kind of editing style into the Bond thing to kind of make it a little bit more hip, I guess is as close as I can get. When I started doing that, you know, this family has been together for 40 years because they had been doing it a certain way for so long. And the new style of editing with the speed ramps and all that stuff, they were a little thrown back. And then when we started putting the movie together and seeing how people were reacting to it, they really, really warmed up to it, and it became a lot of fun.
What we didn't want to end up with was just another car chase where the cars roared along and had squealing tires, and they're on ice, for God's sake. We're going to try and avoid all these cliches. But we're using a device known as speed ramping, which is no stranger to television commercials, music videos, or even some movies now.
This shot was shot at this speed, running across the glacier and then revealing the two cars in the ice. And then they came closer and went out of frame.
You increase and decrease the speed of the film at alarming rates, very fast, very slow, according to however you want to use it. And it's usually to do with music or to do with the pace of things.
It's all very nice and shows geography very well, but it's also very time consuming. So I get ideas like this. So I will high speed across the glacier field, slow down to show what we have going, and then keep it going as fast as possible, just because it's a I'm not a big advocate of cutting just for the sake of cutting. If there's a crane shot that takes, you know, 9 or 10 feet to complete, let it ride out because it's a beautiful shot. There's no reason to interfere with what I believe was the director's vision of how he wanted that to happen. There's no reason just to cut for cutting's sake, because that just makes for confusion, number one, and number two, it's my feeling of it's a way of getting out of a problem, and if there's no problem in a shot, then why not stay on it? The only science for action editing is story. You'll watch films that have action sequences and there won't be any really story involved, it's just car chase. When I look at the footage, I like to think about what is the reasoning behind why this car went there. This represents a 3 times around chase, which became too long, so we made it 2. We decided that Bond would use his invisible car at this time. So when Zhao started revving up his engine and going, and just as Zhao is about to hit him, he makes it invisible. But before that, you see an insert of metal pegs coming out of the tires, and he rolls up the side of the back of a wall, and Zhao comes off and 40 feet in the air and lands and dies, and the car appears almost vertical on the wall. It reappears and then rolls back down and goes back downstairs again. So that was the death sequence that was come up with way after the beginning of shooting and right towards the end of editing. I find dialogue scenes to be my favorite scenes because it's more old-time filmmaking when there's dialogue going on. So the scene in the hothouse I felt was a lot of fun and really well done.
You never thought of looking inside your own organization?
The Icarus presentation I never really liked because it was just so long and so there was too much going on because they were looking at the presentation. We were up in space. Pierce and Halle were down looking at other people in the crowd, and there was just too many stories going on, and for that to translate took so long. So what we had to do is we had to get rid of certain parts of the 5 stories that were within the one scene, and it was hard to let some of those go because it was like, well, how is that going to affect it later on? I think the most important thing for me as an editor is when I'm cutting scene 2, I still got to think about scene 185 because how is this going to affect this, and keeping the big picture in my head. Using the Avid is a highly, highly advantageous thing. A, because I can cut with 8 tracks of sound. B, I can have up to 20 layers of video, and there was a there's a sequence in the hospital where Bond is actually meditating himself into a state where he can get his heart rate down, and there was multi-layers of dissolves and things going on, and it was 9 layers of video, and the great thing about that is that before you couldn't see any kind of pre-visualization about what that was going to be like until you sent it to the lab. A week later, maybe you got one of the dissolves back, but here I could do 9 layers of dissolves and cross and do all that stuff. I have never been able to separate my life as far as when I go home, I don't think about editing. That's not true. I always think about it. I'm laying in bed at night and I'm thinking, well, if I just, what if I try this tomorrow? What if I do this? And so it is very emotional.
I always felt like the best part of a Bond movie is the opening 10 seconds, because you got the gun barrel, and for that 10 seconds, potentially the best Bond movie ever made is about to start. Because it's almost like it's impossible now to make the greatest Bond film ever, because the greatest Bond film ever is made up of all tiny bits of all the other, 20 films now. You can't beat the sound of 85 people in a room putting everything into a performance. It's quite an isolating job being a composer. For most of the time you're spending 15, 16 hours a day in a dark room with the door shut, looking at these people doing what they're doing on the screen and trying to find music which is going to work for it, and you do that 7 days a week for 3.5 months, and you emerge at the end of it blinking and pale and having lived on junk food and sat down on your backside for 3.5 months wishing you could be a bit healthier, and you come into a fantastic studio like this and you record it with fantastic musicians, and that's kind of it. It's like you don't really get to meet that many people. Your world is the world of the music, of the movie. I mean, each one of these movies presents you with the same mountain to climb, but a different set of obstacles in the way, and all you know is that you can't really take the same route that you took last time. In a way, you could write the same score to the same 3 movies if you really wanted to. The character is essentially the same, and he's essentially doing the same things in not dissimilar situations. He's being chased or he's chasing, and he's with a girl or he's not with a girl, and he's getting his gadgets and he's using them or he's not. So I mean, the situations that Bond find himself in stay fairly constant, from one film to the next, with obviously occasional dramatic differences. With Bond, it's like it's a complete world. It's its own universe. The worst thing about action music is just such a lot of notes. It's just like the page is black with notes, and a lot of them are 6 or 7 minutes long, these sequences, and they're usually quite fast. So nice slow music is less notes, so it's a little bit easier as well. As a musician, you always kind of look for like an emotional input to a sequence. Sometimes another explosion or another gunshot doesn't give you that. So it's nice when you get the occasional moments like with Jinx. I tend to save the Bond theme, Monty Norman's Bond theme. I tend to save that until Bond does something, typically Bond-esque. Sometimes if he's in danger, I'll play it in a darker style. But when he comes out over the top of that ice wave, there's really only one thing to play. What I was trying to do on this film, more than perhaps the others, is to try and work with the sound of the orchestra a little differently. I recorded in the hovercraft chase and on the ice chase. I recorded all the strings and the brass and woodwind separately, so I could put them into the computer and actually chop them up and have them playing backwards and upside down, and distorting them and throwing things in the surround. So there are moments in the hovercraft chase and in the ice chase where orchestral phrases will be playing backwards at the back of the theatre, and then they'll kind of travel around the surrounds to the front where they kind of solidify, and then other things will be spinning around. So you're kind of playing with the technology a little bit. Of actually writing the music for the chase forwards, then phonetically kind of reversing it. So the music that the musicians play is phonetically backwards of the phrase that I want to hear, and then I get them to play that, and then the recording that they make, I flip it over so it comes back the right way. But ultimately, when you're writing Bond music, it has to sound like Bond music, no matter how many tricks and things that you throw at it, and no matter how contemporary you would like to try and make it feel with electronics and chopping up bits and pieces and distorting things. I think an audience always expects to hear a kind of orchestral presence, to kind of keep harking back to the brilliant stuff that John created, and that's that signature sound. So, and as long as I'm doing it, I'm never going to get away from that, because it's, you'd be stupid to, because it's just perfect.
I tried to build these little moments of very, very old Bond movies in there, create new characters, old characters, Cuban characters, a sense of espionage. There's Cold War, Korea.
We both go back to what Cubby taught us. One of the most important things he said to us, I think, was, don't screw it up. Fleming had created this character. They had created a whole film genre. He used to say, everybody will try and mess with it.
It's quite like doing an independent film, sort of low-budget film, and that's from the point of view of the passion.
I grew up watching Bond and sort of fantasizing about being in that world of mystery and intrigue.
Bond used to be the only real event movie. Now there are big blockbusters always being made. But the one thing that the Bond films have is that the hero operates in a world that you'd like to be in.
When I was a kid, everybody talked about the Bond. What's he gonna do next time?